There's over 100,000 Canadians living in Canada collecting a British pension, but it's not adjusted to inflation. And today we have a special guest that's going to talk about the current state of the British pension while you live in Canada and what they're fighting for going forward. Today we're bringing on Ian Andexser, who is the chair of the Canadian Alliance of British Pensioners, and we'll link their information below. But Ian is an expert around British pensions, how they work, and for many of you, you've paid into a British pension at some point in your life, but you may not ever collect a pension, and if you do, it's not indexed to inflation. There's a lot of nuances, and we actually come across it a lot in our day-to-day with our clients as we put together fee-for-service retirement plans. So I wanted to bring Ian in today to talk about the pension, how it works, and how to make sure you maximize it. Because a lot of you are missing out, and I want you to make sure that you're getting every single dollar possible. So let's welcome Ian to the channel. Yeah, so I guess to start, Ian, just maybe tell me a bit about like the current landscape of the UK pension and what's going on with that, and then we'll jump
Yep.
into what you guys are doing to help move this forward and get maybe a bit more pressure on the UK government there.
Adam, thank you for inviting me to speak with you and your listeners. I appreciate the opportunity. I am British. I've lived in Canada since I was about 25 years old. And like most people at that age, you don't even think about pensions, but it does creep up on you very quickly. And when I was in my 50s, I heard about the Canadian Alliance of British Pensioners. I contacted them and discovered that in order to receive a British state pension, you need a minimum of 10 years of contributions into the system. I only had 6. So in my mind, I thought I'm not going to get a pension. But what they informed me was that the British government allows people to make voluntary contributions into the state pension scheme from overseas. And I thought it would be foolish for me to not buy at least a minimum of 4 years because I already had 6 when I worked there. And I continued to pay into that scheme until I hit retirement in 2016 at age 65. What I discovered was that because I'd chosen to live in a Commonwealth country, there was no reciprocal agreement between the two countries. And my British pension from the day that I received it in Canada was never, ever going to increase. Unlike if I'd lived in the United States, our neighbors to the south, I would get a fully indexed pension. Now, just to give you some perspective on that, the idea of the indexation every year is so that pensioners can keep up with inflation wherever they happen to live. And it just disappointed me to think that the British government had created a two-tiered system, that they would uprate it in some countries in the world, but not others. And alarmingly, the ones who get punished the most, believe it or not, is the Commonwealth countries. And you would think that if there was going to be any uprating, it would be the Commonwealth that would get it. We're supposed to be part of an organized group, not the least of which is it defies the charter of the Commonwealth Charter, whereby everybody is supposedly to be treated equally, regardless. So I started to get more involved in finding out why this had happened. And the British state pension scheme was introduced after the Second World War in 1946. And subsequently, at that time, obviously, there weren't that many people who were working and living overseas who qualified for a British pension. But it was only perhaps in the late 60s when people started to realize living in Canada, they weren't getting an index pension. And a few very disgruntled people started to look into this, and hence the association was formed. Right now, there are approximately 117,000 British pensioners that live in Canada. And
Wow.
many of them have been receiving a pension for over 25 to 30 years. There's an example of a man in Vancouver who worked all his life in the UK, paid into the national insurance scheme, which is mandatory when you're working in the UK. And at age 65, he decided he would leave and move to White Rock, just south of Vancouver, to be close to his daughter and his grandchild. That was 30, he's now 99, so that would have been 34 years ago. He has never seen an increase in his pension in 34 years. And at that time, it was £47. And that's what he still gets, £47. We have calculated that over 35 years, approximately, he has been robbed of over $120,000, which he justifiably should have received. And ironically, if he lived about 600 yards further south, he'd be in across the USA border, and he would
Yeah.
get that. It just doesn't make any sense. So we have been fighting for the rights of the pensioners in Canada. But similarly, there's an organization in Australia where they have over 230,000 British pensioners that suffer the same discrimination. We've been fighting a long time now to get this overturned, and we haven't won yet, but a war isn't won overnight. And we have come a hell of a long way in our fight to a point that right now we feel we have some strong momentum. There is an awful lot happening in the United Kingdom today. We just delivered a letter to 10 Downing Street that has cross-party support from over 150 MPs from the two countries to try to convince the British government that this has to stop. I'm not sure where we're going to go from here, but there is a lady in Calgary who's 99 years old. She turns 100 in December. She has booked a flight to go to the UK in December to speak with the British Prime Minister. And quite
Yeah.
honestly, he doesn't have a lot of choice, because if he says no, the press will be all over that. We
Yeah.
have to wait to see where it's going to come. But it's wrong, it's discrimination, and it's immoral.
What's the reasoning in the first place why they don't increase? Just like you said, like literally that gentleman in White Rock, if he swam 50 meters south, he would get indexing. So what was the reason in the first place behind that?
British government continually put up three arguments, the reason they will not uprate our pensions in Canada. And we can defeat every one of them very, very easily. The first argument is that they say they only uprate where they have a reciprocal agreement with countries. And they did start to make these in the 60s and 70s. They would approach countries around the world and they would create a reciprocal agreement. They came to Canada, I think it was around about 1970 or 71, right after they'd struck an agreement with the United States. And they wanted to create this reciprocal agreement between the two countries. Unfortunately, Canada had just introduced its own CPP, and under the legislation, the way that it was written in Parliament, they couldn't agree to it. And they basically said to Canada, to the UK, we're not able to do that right now. Give us some time. We'll rewrite our legislation so that we can then enact a proper reciprocity. 2 years later, when they went back to the UK and said, okay, we're ready now, at that time, the UK said, well, that's it. We're not signing any more agreements. And that's one of the arguments they stuck to for a long, long time. We are not signing any more agreements. They've now shot themselves in the foot, because with Brexit, there were 27 countries in the EU where there were over 650,000 British pensioners who were receiving uprated pensions based on their involvement with the EU. When we left the EU, Britain had to make 27 new agreements to continue to uprate the pensions for those people. They did that.
So there's
And the
precedents.
reason
Yeah, there's precedents there.
exactly, it set a precedent. The reason they did it was because most of those EU countries are very close to the English Channel. And you could just imagine the uproar that there would have been with over 600,000 suddenly realizing their pensions were not going to go up. Many of them would have said, well, to hell with this, we're going to go back. And that would have created massive problems on the healthcare system, because benefits that are given to pensioners in the United Kingdom are estimated to cost the British government £2,600 every year, with free bus passes, free TV licenses, heating allowances, and so on. So they basically set a precedent. Also, notwithstanding, is that we have had official government documents saying that a reciprocal agreement is not required. They think it is, but it's not. A simple act of Parliament could put an end to this. The second reason they have is historical. And I can quote verbatim, word for word, the government excuse. This has been a long-standing policy followed by successive governments for over 70 years. Well, that history is not justification to perpetuate something that's wrong.
Yeah.
Because if it were, we would still have slavery, we'd still have apartheid, and not the least of which is there wouldn't be any women working in Parliament as MPs until the suffragette movement turned things around for women at the turn of the century. So history does not justify. The third reason they give is they say they cannot afford it. And that's nonsense. They are required to maintain a minimum fund in the pension budget, which at the end of 2025 is estimated to be sitting at £56 million. Now, the British government continually alarmed the residents in the UK, saying that it would cost £960 million to uprate pensioners all around the world. By the way, there's a total of about 470,000 that suffer this way. The number that they calculate is based on something that the British government has never, ever done before. When they've entered into reciprocal agreements with new countries, they only offer the indexation at the year that they're doing it to the level that people are receiving. In other words, the man who was getting £47 a week would get 2% on top of that. The number that the government do is they say, well, he should be getting £169. What would 2% on top of that be? And that's where they come up with the 960 million figure. It's never happened before. Historically, it never will happen. They just use that alarming figure to try to defend an undefensible policy.
And so you guys are fighting, obviously, for, inflation adjustment from today. You're not looking to go back to, 30 years for this gentleman in White Rock to say, hey, you owe him 120 grand and inflation on top of the 162 or whatever it was a month.
Adam, that's what should happen. But we have to be realistic. That's what should happen, but we have to be realistic. And of course, if we are successful in getting indexation going forward, there will be a lot of the older members who will feel aggrieved, and quite rightly so. As you say, the man in White Rock. But this battle is being fought not for just now, but for the future. 25 years. If we can start this now, 25 years from now, everybody will be getting an index pension, because most people will be up at that time in their 90s. There'll be a few, obviously, if they live to be 99. But we've got to start somewhere. And the British government can afford to start by indexing the 2% or 2.5% that's forecast for 2026. I think it's 4% that's going to go up next year. We've just missed out on 2 previous years. It went up almost 20%. Yeah. Now, that would make a difference. There's a lot of people in Canada that are living day to day, and they just cannot afford.
And if they're, one of their main incomes, that pension, their food doubled overnight essentially, but their income didn't. So there's a disconnect here. Yeah,
exactly. And of course, a lot of these people that came here are relying on their British pension because they didn't pay into a Canadian pension scheme.
Yeah, but someone that paid into a Canadian CPP, if they move Britain, UK, wherever, they're getting indexation across the board. So there's a huge disconnect there, obviously.
That's simply because Canada treats its senior citizens with dignity.
Yeah, some might argue that, but someone on your side would say,
as far as a pension is concerned, yes, you're right. Absolutely. If you're Canadian living anywhere in the world, your pension would rise with the same as it would if you were living back in Canada.
So for those of the people that are watching this, that you have a British pension, that are wondering about this, how can they get more information from your organization, get help, get more information? Where do they go?
Well, that's one of the things that I think is another anomaly, because as long as we exist fighting the British government to get what we justifiably deserve, we're also costing them money, because we act as informants for people who are living in Canada who are British or have worked in Britain. By the way, you don't have to be British, you just have to have worked there. We're informing people of their rights, and a lot of them didn't even know about it. We hold monthly seminars informing people how they can qualify for a British pension, how they can increase their British pension. And it's astonishing the number of people who we've had in the last year. We must have had close to 500 people sign up to listen to our little spiel explaining what they have to do. And 95% of them say, I had no idea. I had no idea I could still get a British pension. When I was allowed to buy my pension going forward, the British government, crazy, but they also allowed me to retroactively buy 10 years. And when I did that, not once was I ever told by anybody with the Department of Work and Pensions, by the way, because you've chosen to live in Canada, your pension is never going to increase. They never tell you that. They're happy to take your money. They're not happy to, they certainly won't volunteer the frozen part of the information. So how do people learn about this? Get a hold of our website. It's britishpensions.com. And if you send Sarah in the office an email and just say you'd like to be invited to the next seminar, we'd be happy to talk to you. It takes about 35 to 40 minutes. and we give all the information to people and let them know what they might be entitled to.
Wonderful. And we'll link that below. So if you're watching this video, check below. We'll link all that below so you can get that information. So, yeah, mind blowing. Like as we've worked with clients through this, it's yeah, it's crazy to think that this actually happened. So for you, going back to your situation, now you said you had 6 years paid in, you bought more back. Going back, would you have just bought the 4 years and got to the 10-year mark so that you've at least collected something for the 6 that you put in?
Yeah, they basically do it on a fraction. You need 35 years to get a full British pension. So if you have 10, which you need, if you've got
Mhm.
9, you've got nothing. So if you have to get to that 10, and at that point in time, you would get 10/35 of the
Yeah.
pension. Now, because I was a little bit late by the time I discovered about this, I don't get a full British pension. I only got in, I think, about 29 years, but it's still giving me close to $10,000 a year. And that's what
Which
I've
should be
been.
12 or 15 by now.
Oh, I've lost about
Or much
seven or
more.
eight. I've lost about $7,000 or $8,000 already,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
every year
Crazy.
it's going to continue to go up and up and up. I always use the example, Adam, of some poor British person living in Niagara Falls. If he's on the Canadian side of the bridge, he gets a frozen pension. 200 yards across on the other side, you get a fully indexed pension. It's just illogical.
It is. Well, White Rock, I mean, I live 20 minutes from there, right? Like it's
Yep,
you swim 50 meters and you're in the
yep,
US, right? So
yep. Crazy.
yeah, yeah, it is crazy. Well, Ian, thank you for coming on today, sharing your insight, your wisdom on this. And again, we will link all those resources below so that people that are in the situation or didn't even know if that's, this was a thing, reach out to Ian's team there to gather more information and help yourself and join the battle essentially too. Because, if you're someone that has a British pension, this could, be very impactful for you. So Ian, thank you
You
for joining us.
You're welcome. If you've paid into the British pension scheme, if you don't get 10 years, you've just given them your money and you'll get nothing back. It's a no-brainer, Adam. It really is.